The following action research project was undertaken in a Stage 1, Year 1 class within North Epping Primary School. The project ventured to integrate the MEE framework of engagement in literacy and numeracy by incorporating the use of social learning to motivate and engage developing students within their learning. The project has endeavoured to transform educational processes between myself and my students to achieve highly effective, cognitive, and operative experiences for all, moving away from standardized educative procedures. I hold a copy of this assignment if the original is lost or damaged. I hereby certify that no part of this assignment or product has been submitted by me in another previous or current assessment, except where appropriately referenced and with prior permission from the unit coordinator of this unit. I confirm that I have submitted the script of my conversational presentation to plagiarism detection software programs for the purpose of detecting possible plagiarism. Epping North Public School is located in the North Sydney district, a middle-class culturally diverse residential area within Greater Western Sydney. Epping North Public School has an enrolment of 420 students across 18 K-6 classrooms. Approximately 30% of the student population within the school originates from a linguistic background other than English. The school has a resolute focus on literacy and numeracy achievement and incorporates mini-lit, multi-lit, and mathematical specialist programs with the provision of support staff. An EALD consultant also works on site, catering for the needs of EALD students across all stages. Within my final practicum, I was allocated a Stage 1, Year 1 class consisting of culturally, linguistically, and academically diverse learners. The class was comprised of 22 students in total, 7 students with an EALD background and 6 students that required additional support across literacy and numeracy strands, who were my targeted focus. My mentor teacher has a total of 17 years of professional experience across multiple stages and assisted greatly in the formation of my action research. My experiences throughout this case study have brought to light the transformative nature of action research. Reflecting upon my research plan, corroborating with my focus group, and taking part in recurrent educative practice, it became clear to me that major modifications to my preliminary differentiation focus were required due to a lack in innovative pedagogical progressions within the classroom. Initially, it was my intention to support developing students through the use of differentiated resources. A fundamentally uninspired focus led to seclusion, division, and failure to meet shared learning outcomes. As such, it became clear that in order to transcend beyond standardized learning processes, a shift towards social interaction and shared learning was necessitated. Through active and concurrent dialogue between my mentor and myself, this shift towards social learning theory highlighted the achievable opportunities possible for cognitive stimulation, community learning, and improved self-efficacy for students. Nonetheless, initial concepts within my previous plan would still translate into my adapted focus. For example, I would still facilitate educational discourses that supported and immersed students within their learning. These discourses would continue to be evolving and reflexive through the provision of targeted learning experiences which originated from purposeful planning. A focus on developing students would still be maintained, but with the collusion of the whole class within the interactive group work and peer learning. As Koenig and Sabar support, knowledge and skill acquisition for developing students could lead to the recognition of successes possible when providing effective discourses of social learning. The MEE framework aligned well with my adapted research plan, as I aim to support the self-efficacy and educational valuing of students, M, by prioritizing the participation of developing students within stimulated pedagogical interactions and relationships, small e. The marriage of engaging messages and motivation within my adapted research has allowed me to work towards achieving a more engaging educational discourse. The focal integration of the Inside a Classroom framework lends credence to goals of establishing a community of learners through social learning, providing opportunities for highly cognitive, operative, and effective experiences of learning toward deeper levels of engagement for students. Consequently, this also aligns with my personal philosophies of teaching, as I inhabit the role of a personal and social agent of betterment for students within a conscious learning environment. The Inside a Classroom framework has guided the ways in which power may be shared between myself and my students towards outcomes of inclusivity. Moreover, I work towards constructing a substantive community of student reflection and engagement to enhance my own pedagogy. Fundamentally, there were a total of 6 developing students targeted within the action research. However, due to the collaborative nature of social learning theory, the entire class would be used as mediators within group work and peer teaching. Consequently, a diverse range of developing, mid-range, and extension students would collude within social interactions to enhance outcomes of motivation and engagement for targeted developing learners. With a resolute focus on literacy and numeracy at Epping North Public School, these key learning areas would serve as pillars of my action research. In literacy, students would take part in collaborative whole-class research tasks to compose multiple fact files. Groups of 4 would be allocated roles at commencement, and projects would subsequently move toward guided peer learning as students worked in pairs. In numeracy, developing students conducted inquiry-based open-ended tasks in their maths groups. Students later moved toward working in smaller, micromanaged groups with less educative guidance from the teacher and with more independent collusion. Through conversations with both my mentor teacher and the school principal, the school's ethics and responsibilities policy did not demand consent forms from the parents of targeted students. However, a consent form was required from the mentor teacher and school principal. These consent forms were provided to and signed by both my mentor and principal as evidence within Appendix 2, in order to obtain permission for me to conduct my action research and collect student data within the classroom. Observations were made during and after students conducted social learning by both my mentor teacher and myself. These observations were recorded within teacher feedback and reflection forms during the creation of fact files and inquiry-based mathematical activities. They provided avenues for teacher reflection and subsequent improvements to engagement. Active dialogue between students and myself was also recorded during the formation of groups and during group corroboration in literacy and numeracy. These conversations reflected the degree to which students could work successfully and communicated the cognitive, effective, and operative outcomes achieved during social learning. Work samples collected provided tangible evidence to the success of the action research focus. They gave relevant and conditional insight into the evolution of student learning within a shared learning environment and were collected using photographic evidence when students had completed a specific literacy or numeracy task. Finally, students conducted reflective learning following the completion of collaborative tasks. In literacy, students made use of the class Wonderwall and reflective questioning directed to them by the teacher. In numeracy, students recorded photos and videos as evidence of their thinking with the use of ICT resource Seesaw. These assessments shed light on student development through the process. Focusing on developing students within my case study, motivation was a notable attribute lacking for those who were targeted. Developing students either lacked self-efficacy when learning or struggled to remain engaged for prolonged periods of time when working independently. Consequently, students would resort to disruptive behaviours that would often result in the disruption of other members of the class who were willing to engage with the prescribed learning intention. As such, proficient educational discourses that instilled a sense of school valuing for students seemed unattainable. It was therefore my role and challenge as an educator to provide avenues of motivation through effective learning processes that arose through the integration of social learning theory within the classroom. It was the continual reflection of these processes by myself that were used to inform the redesign of my action research and its constant evolution. What began as informed group work designed to integrate a merger of specific learning levels and roles in literacy led to more personal learning experiences between pairs with the introduction of learning buddies. Moreover, the redesign of social learning within numeracy saw the division of the developing numeracy group into 2 smaller groups, integrating activities with more focused and open-ended collaborative investigations to facilitate their engagement. Across both key learning areas, it was critical that students weren't merely demonstrating compliancy to task work, but that they were entering a community of practice where development in their consciousness as active participants was constantly stimulated. This brought forth a dramatic and evident shift in student behaviours and a willingness to learn. No matter how the project evolved over time, the transformative nature of the program sought to encourage a sense of school is for me for students, and social elements of learning remained constant over the duration of the case study. The transformative development of my action research can be evidenced within the observational data collected and referenced within Work Sample 1. Placing developing students in pre-designed groups with diverse ability learners intended to introduce targeted students to social learning. The allocation of a role suitable for developing students provided them with an outlet for effective and operative responses where they felt valued within cooperative learning. taking part within the activity as fact finders that brainstorm facts without the use of ICT on their prescribed subject, aimed to instill a sense of agency for developing students as they inhabited an active role within the group. Student S struggled to remain on task, however, and was highly impulsive due to a change in routine. This is evidenced in Observation 1 and Observation 2, where my mentor teacher and myself recognize points of concern and suggest revising or simplifying the use of roles within literacy group work. This is further evidenced in Learning Conversation 1, where minor disruptions were identified through the impulsive disruption of student C when allocating group roles. The student initially but briefly disputed the role provided to them, which stagnated the commencement of the activity. However, when the role for student C was substantially outlined, the student was immediately responsive and demonstrated engagement by appearing evidently excited by their responsibility. The relationship between effective and operative learning processes of increased self-efficacy through engaging messages were effective as an introduction to group work, yet observational data suggested a shift toward more refined group corroboration and definition. This led to me experimenting with the division of smaller groups within numeracy when students engaged with questioning in Work Sample 2. Dividing the Rockets, which was the developing numeracy group, into two pre-designed groups allowed for a more nuanced and settled interaction between learners with little disruption. A reflection of students that worked well together was considered within the design process, and the separation of students S and K and C and W were necessitated. The activities challenged students to think about and draw shapes with a designated number of sides or attributes, using their miniature whiteboards, and facilitated cognitive learning as students collaborated and assisted the learning of others when solving their inquiry together. Excessive micromanagement was still required, as evidenced within Observation 3 and Observation 4, within mentor feedback and self-reflection. This was a result of the regular dependency of developing students to teacher facilitation within the past and was an area in need of addressing moving forward. Continued cooperative learning activities with open-ended solutions assisted in reducing my involvement in kickstarting student thinking and the dependency of my facilitation during tasks. As evidenced in Learning Conversation 2, a developing student facilitated the learning of another when dividing 10 counters equally within 10 cups or less. With a range of ways to respond, Student C assisted Student K, who was struggling to find a solution to the problem. With minor assistance, developments in student cognition for Student K were evidenced, and the potential for engaging messages between students through peer learning were revealed to me through reflection. Student C had become highly responsive to social learning, as evidenced through an excitement to help others within communal practices. The natural progression of my case study would inform a recommendation of adjustments to the design of social learning processes moving forward. Reflecting upon the successes and disruptions during literacy would inform my decision to disband larger group work in order to facilitate more substantive participation of students such as J and S within their learning. As such, the introduction of a learning buddy would be integrated within literacy tasks. Each student within the class would be allocated a learning buddy, with developing students paired with a mid-range ability peer role model to assist in substantiating their engagement. This is evidenced in Work Sample 3, where student J navigated around the world while their learning buddy collected facts on each port using an ICT resource. Pairs were made to feel like insiders within their classroom, and students were able to interact and share opportunities of learning together. Work Sample 4 supports this, demonstrating the creation of a personalized fact file using facts obtained between learning buddies. As such, students were able to share ideas and processes of learning within a conscious environment toward the independent creation of their own fact file. In numeracy, the allocation of learning buddies was dependent on the ability level of students. Developing students were paired with other developing students, and activities progressed toward a focus on competitively balanced learning. As evidenced within Work Sample 5, one student was required to translate a groups of sentence into a number sentence using repeated addition, in this case 3 groups of 4. The other student was required to represent this using a visual of their choosing. Roles would then switch. Work Sample 6 demonstrates a similar activity. One student rolls a dice twice to create their groups of sentence, whilst the other student would respond by illustrating the corresponding model on their whiteboard. As such, an emphasis was placed on sharing power between students as they constructed their own mathematical problems toward outcomes of paired engagement. Finally, the use of student self-assessment moved away from establishing me as the sole judge of student learning. Integrating the inside of classroom on my practicum, it was imperative that appropriate means of self-assessment were afforded to students. The consistent use of the seesaw application within numeracy provided students with a platform for assessing which they were familiar with. Students were instructed to take photos of their achievements as seen within Student Assessment 1 and take pride in their work. This work was viewable by the entire class within the class journal on Seesaw, and the self-efficacy of students was evidently enhanced as students M and W regularly paraded their work proudly between peers. On occasion, Seesaw was also used to record a student's explanation to a mathematical problem. Through the incorporation of peer assistance, one learning buddy would film whilst the other student communicated their mathematical reasoning. This is evidenced within Student Assessment 2, where students have taken on the responsibility of conducting an evaluation on their own work. In literacy, self-assessments primarily involved the use of the classroom Wonderwall. As seen within Student Assessment 3 and Student Assessment 4, students reflect upon their learning through prompts I have provided to them. These reflections range between future learning interests to more focused assessments on the social learning conducted within the lesson. Questions posed to students often concerned an assessment of how effectively students worked and how they might improve in the future. These reflections were left anonymous, but provided both students and myself indicators of how students were feeling within their partnered learning. As such, students were provided with ongoing opportunities to think about and reflect on the processes of their collaborative learning. Ultimately, the outcomes of my case study revealed that peer-assisted learning works as a highly effective method of education when well-structured, sequential, and complementary of turn-taking, promoting outcomes of engagement through social cohesion for developing students. Fuchs also reveals a supplementary outcome of peer-assisted learning, arguing that high-achieving students profit from peer-assisted programs through the construction of explanations for peers. A more refined focus on the effects of peer learning on extension students is a recommended next step in the research cycle, as is more independent learning. For developing students, however, the continued modification and evolution of my social learning focus revealed a transformation in my pedagogical concern. In addition to knowledge acquisition, the developing students targeted demonstrated critical thinking skills when communicating within interpersonal relationships with their peers. This led to increased levels of agency, where students saw purpose in their involvement in educational discourses. Additionally, the integration of the learning body not only supported avenues for critical reflection by both myself and students, but developing students were able to develop self-directed learning skills that they would carry with them into the future. As such, they demonstrated a shift in behaviours and demonstrated increases in self-efficacy through communal engagement with their peers. Developing students became aware of the concept, school is for me, and demonstrated increased levels of school valuing. Enacting the role of an insider within their classroom, developing students were also introduced to social tools that adhere to motivation and productivity outside of the classroom. My involvement in this project has exposed a superior valuing of the opportunities afforded to students through action research, revealing the potential of social learning to the communication of engaging messages between students. These messages allow students to transcend beyond standardized assumptions of education toward the attainment of increased self-efficacy and the appreciation for schooling through communal belonging. The research project demonstrated that it is my role as a future educator to facilitate the learning progression of students by equipping them with tools necessary for success in their lives. The integration of social learning theory within my practicum has informed my pedagogical thinking toward the betterment of quality teaching and learning experiences for my students within my future classrooms. Appendix 1 demonstrates my focus group participation and communication. I attended Tutorial 7 and collaborated with my group to inform our central ideas. The focus questions provided to me acted as guidance for the formation of my action research. They weaved throughout my presentation and informed a specific focus. I also assisted in advising focus questions for others and provided support to my peers throughout their action research development. Participation in my focus group was largely reflective of my integration of social learning within my case study. Appendix 2 is evidence of the consent provided to me by my mentor teacher and school principal.